Aloha, and welcome back to Talk Story with John Waihee. We have got a historic show for you today. This is more than just interesting. Our guest is the senior senator from the state of Hawaii, Senator Brian Schatz, and he is here to talk to us about all the events that he recently went through in Washington, D.C. I don't even know how to comprehend what it must have been like, Senator, when you were doing your work. I mean, you were essentially electing the President of the United States or confirming the presidency of the United States when the Capitol building was attacked, when what we are now referring to as an insurrection occurred. I, well, tell us what it was like. I mean, where were you, and how did this affect your day, and what happened?
So we were all on the floor for the process, and it's normally considered, an uneventful process. But obviously, because Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and the 45th president of the United States had turned it into kind of some question, everyone was in their seat, and James Langford from Oklahoma was starting to give remarks. And I know James, and he was about to say, look, I don't think the election was stolen, but a lot of people I know do. And so I'm just asking questions, kind of a thing.
That's a little hedgy.
Yeah. And so I was getting irritated because I have a decent enough relationship with James, but I could feel my irritation rise. And in that moment, Vice President Pence was presiding over the Senate, which is unusual. But he was there, and his particular security detail removed him from the floor like very fast.
So you're sitting in your seat, you look up at the front and the podium, and they're taking him out of the room.
And remember that we don't have, like, individual senators don't have protective units, right? We're protected generally by the Capitol Police, but only the vice president and the majority and minority leader and the president pro tem get executive protection kind of thing. And so then they put the president pro temp in the chair, and then pretty much immediately his detail removed him. And so then we knew anyone with an individual responsibility to protect a member was getting their member out of there. And this was all, remember, this is all in the course of like 45 seconds. And then they gavel out James Langford. They start to lock all of the doors of the chamber and tell us to stay in our seats. I couldn't tell you whether that was a 7-minute process or a 90-second process, but we stayed in our seats. And then one of the police officers was inside of the chamber, which is somewhat unusual. And he said, shots fired, lockdown. And then they moved us. And then they moved us in a single file line on foot to a secure location, which was in the Capitol complex. Still not allowed to say exactly where that was. But then they moved us. And my main concern at that point was just, there were a lot of steps, and they're slick and they're marble. And my main concern was just making sure some of the elderly members of the Senate didn't slip in the process of moving to safety.
I'm assuming that this is somewhat chaotic.
It was pretty chaotic, but I will say that only afterwards did we understand exactly how chaotic it all was, right? While all this is happening, you've got Eugene Goodman, who I know, the officer who is being recognized for essentially saving the Senate by luring this group of insurrectionists in the wrong direction while pushing them back and while threatening them with a baton, even though he's totally overwhelmed. But he lured them in the only direction he could have, away from the Senate floor, even though they were trying to find the Senate floor, and in the direction of where there were more Capitol Police, where he had backup. But all of that was happening 50 feet from where we were. We didn't know. We heard noise, and we were being instructed to leave. So I never felt personally in danger, except for frankly, what felt like a distinct possibility of a sort of mass casualty event. We didn't know if people had explosives, but it never got kinetic for me, But one of my colleagues, Patty Murray, who did a great interview with Judy Woodruff at PBS, was in one of her offices called a hideaway. And John, you know what a hideaway is.
Right.
It's an office off the floor. And she was hiding in her little office, and they were slamming on the doors. And she was on the ground with her husband, and they were saying, "Hang them all," and "Where's Mike Pence?" and "Who's
Wow.
here?" And she was, I mean, she really had a more terrifying experience than I did. It was only in the aftermath of it that I understood that we were in real danger during those moments.
Well, let me ask you. See, you wouldn't. Usually, when I have, gone up to Washington and looked at, there aren't that many times when the entire Senate, for the most part, would go and be on the floor. So this was an occasion, a specific kind of occasion, where that would have happened. So and I don't know how did all of this fit together? I mean, you guys were on the floor, you were doing, and now you're hauled out.
Well,
Now,
and this is why it's so dangerous, right? And it of course it's the temple of democracy in the first place, but the fact that you had the first, second, and third line in succession for the presidency in the same location being under siege um, makes it
wow,
truly consequential for the continuity of American style democracy. And that, I think, is what we all wrestled with in the aftermath, not just the violence and the tragic deaths, um, and the kind of just instinctual offense that you take in seeing the peaceful transfer of power being undermined, but also the idea that, oh my God, they really were out for blood. There were some people who were just acting like donkeys, and there were some people who had no idea it was going to turn this violent. But there were some people with radio comms, with tactical gear, and with at least some semblance of a plan. And we need to recognize that when fascism arrives in other countries, it is often ridiculed as silly and incompetent, and all of the things that we have ridiculed some of these folks for being, because there's always an element of goofiness to a fascist leader
right.
that allows that person to get away with some of their statements by sort of being half joking, right? Remember what they used to say about Trump: take him seriously, but not literally. And I think it is time we take, if someone starts to talk about overthrowing American style democracy, we should expect that that's what they mean to do.
Wow, so okay, so now this all happened. Fortunately, you were safe. I'm assuming that something similar was happening on the House side. We'll get to their perspective, but as a result of what happened there, they send you these articles of impeachment, and you just went through this trial. Give us some of your feedback on what that was like.
Well, it was, I mean, I really do have mixed feelings in the most profound sense. On the one hand, um, it still shocks my conscience that we couldn't find 75 votes to convict and to prohibit from seeking or holding a future office of trust or profit. Because I believe that impeachment was designed for precisely this kind of scenario where a president would use his or her a power as commander in chief and leader of the free world, specifically for the purpose of retaining power.
Yes.
That's what the founders feared the most. And remember, this is not a criminal case. We don't have to have an evidentiary standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. The question is, what are the minimum standards for presidential conduct, and did he not meet them? And the reason you give the executive branch and the federal government so much power, unlike lots of other forms of democracy, parliamentary systems and others, is because the ultimate check on that executive authority is impeachment. If it's rendered, as they say, a nullity, if it's rendered useless because you're going to need 67 votes and you're always going to find a sufficient number of Republicans who will enable this behavior, that's pretty scary stuff. So on that level, I'm angry and I'm frustrated. On the other level, I did my own analysis of where this thing was going to land, and I didn't expect to get 7 votes. 7 votes is higher than even my most optimistic expectations. And I was talking with Republicans, and I don't want to get them in trouble back home for naming them. But my sense was that we were going to get 2 or 3 or 4 Republicans. So 7 was a very big number, uh, and a pretty big and historic repudiation of the president's conduct. And so on that level, I was really super happy. Just one final thought is, boy, watching Stacey Plaskett and Joe Neguse and David Cicilline and Madeline Dean, not to mention Jamie Raskin. Um, I just felt really proud to be a Democrat, and I felt very fortunate to be. We were talking before the show started how, even if I didn't have this job, I would have been not doing whatever job I held just to watch the impeachment trial. So it's not lost on me that it is simply put an honor to be a part of a proceeding this important. And watching Jamie Raskin, I never went to law school, but I felt like if law school were like that, I could have easily done 3 years.
You would have done it. But they presented. I mean, from where I sat, which was where you would have been sitting, as you indicated, were you not actually part of the history? Where I sat, it looked like the House managers did a great job. I mean, they presented a case that was outstanding. And what was so compelling was to watch the timeline between what was happening and what Trump was doing at that time. Uh, he thought it was at worst funny.
That's
you know,
right.
And his argument with McCarthy on whether he should send any kind of security over to the Capitol to help the Capitol police was, I mean, just mind blowing that a president of the United States would say, well, maybe they're more enthusiastic or something along that line about the election than you are, to his own person.
Who's under siege? Who's hiding?
Under siege. And his own, I heard tell that even up till today, some of the Pence people are still feeling the effect because a lot of the people that broke into the Capitol were actually after him.
Yeah.
Were after Pence.
Yeah. I agree with everything you say, and that they made one article of impeachment, and it was incitement of insurrection, and I think that was fine. I will tell you that one of the conversations I had with several of the Republicans who were wrestling with where to land on this, they were a little worried about when you say incitement, that's a specific like statutory crime, and the point I was making is, hey, even if he hadn't done everything leading up to the January 6th speech on the ellipse, right? And where he pointed down the street and said, go and fight like hell. Even if none of that had happened, I still think the president's conduct from the point when we were evacuated until the point when the Capitol was cleared is impeachable and convicted.
Yeah, just that. I think that was, and that case was made. Don't you think so?
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
so clearly.
Because it is a true dereliction of duty. And this is where I think I was able to be persuasive with some of my colleagues. I'm not taking credit for their yes votes, but I basically told them, I said, look, when the United States Capitol and your own vice president is under siege, the Speaker of the House and every member of Congress is unsafe, you race to the Situation Room, right? You assemble your National Security Council, right?
Right, exactly. That's what presidents are supposed to do.
Quickly tweet. I mean, it's not about the tweets, but certainly the first thing you could do to calm things down is you tweet, don't do this in my name, evacuate the Capitol safely and immediately. That's one thing you could do. But even if you set aside all the Twitter stuff, you would just say, let's mobilize the National Guard from Maryland and Virginia and West Virginia and anywhere we can get. Let's get bodies in. Why is the FBI not sending in SWAT teams? Let's coordinate with Mayor Bowser. Let's go. Let's clear the Capitol. And the dereliction of duty, even if you don't suppose that he caused the insurrection, I think it's airtight that he did, was its own case. And then the other thing I think was um, arguably worse than the speech on the ellipse was the call with the Secretary of State of Georgia, the
Oh,
election
wow.
administrator of Georgia, where he says, "Look, I just need 11,780 votes, which would have put him one vote ahead in Georgia," is a thing you cannot do. John, you know this. I know this. You don't get to call the person in charge of the elections and ask for the number of votes that would put you ahead.
I mean, that's kindergarten stuff, right? I mean, you don't do that. I mean, anyway, we're going to take a short break, Senator, and we'll be right back. I want to talk more about when we come back what your feelings are about the aftermath of all of this. How is this affecting our country? And obviously, we want to end with you telling us, um, what you're doing out there and what that means for Hawaii. Okay, so we're going to take a short break. Here. Welcome back to Talk Story with John Waihee and our very special guest, Senator Brian Schatz, who is here to talk about the historical experiences that he just went through with the insurrection and with the impeachment. And right now, I guess like most people in the country, I'm wondering what's the aftermath? What happens now? What becomes of the Democrats and the Republicans and all of this messiness that it was amazing to me. I was watching an article or reading something where I heard Lindsey Graham say, or read that Lindsey Graham said, "Well, I'm about winning, not about finding out any of this stuff."
Yeah, I mean, I think the Republican Party is truly splintering. And there's some data from Gallup that shows that the percentage of Republicans that are really open to a third party that is basically the Trump party has skyrocketed since January 6th. And there's a small erosion of people who are self identifying as Republicans because if you're conservative but you're rational, you may be thinking, well, I'm conservative, but I don't know if I'm for all of this crazy stuff. And and so there's some splintering happening on the right. Democrats are largely unified, obviously, on the question of the insurrection and the aftermath. But also, I think Biden has had a calming and clarifying effect, which is that we're going to have to do two things at once. Most people are more desperate for us to deliver COVID relief than anything else.
Right.
And if you look at the way authoritarian leaders have been vanquished, it's mostly by delivering in terms of people's personal economic situation and just governing better than by being obsessed with the latest outrage. So it's not as though I haven't spent a fair amount of time being appropriately outraged and using all of our constitutional tools to push back against that. It's just that as long as we continue to have elections, that when you're trying to win over most voters, the anti-authoritarians are already for us. The pro-authoritarians are already for them. The people who have no view about authoritarianism are probably going to vote on the basis of how are they doing under Democratic rule. And that's why I think the first thing we should do in the next month or so is COVID relief. Parallel track, however, is I do think we need a 9/11 style, fully authorized, bipartisan commission to investigate every single aspect of what happened on January 6th. Um, the Benghazi committee, that was a tragedy, but, pales in comparison, and yet had 50 hearings and lots of subpoenas and lots of depositions. We need to understand exactly what happened. The impeachment managers made the case, but that doesn't mean they have fleshed out the record about exactly who was involved. Money flows are a very interesting and important aspect of this. All
You're
of this
right.
costs money to fly people in, to provide buses, to provide comms. That's one piece. What our law enforcement posture was, whether in fact it's true that the National Guard was not authorized at the highest levels. There's just lots to learn, but I do want to vest the authority of the Congress in a commission so that we can get to the bottom of all that without having it be literally the only thing that we do for the next 6 months while
Yeah.
people are desperate.
So the president appears to be, taking control of the COVID situation. And it's so interesting, so nice to say president and mean Biden now, and not have to say it with chagrin. But how's he doing on things like climate change and other things that are important to people, keeping the economy going?
Well, I think he's rightly prioritizing within COVID vaccinations and school openings, because that's going to determine our future together. The vaccination rate, as well as the mask wearing rate, will determine how quickly our economy recovers. And school opening is just a moral imperative. So especially in Hawaii, as the COVID rate really continues to drop pretty fast, I'm very anxious to get our schools back open as quickly and as safely as possible. On climate, he's been excellent, and frankly, because of circumstances, even better than Obama, because I think Obama narrowly was working, I shouldn't say so narrowly, but he was working through the State Department and the EPA. And now there's a recognition that climate is everything. It's State Department, it's EPA, it's the Department of Transportation, it's HUD, it's DOD, and he's just got a bunch of old friends who are now climate hawks. Ron Klain used to work for Al Gore, has some Hawaii connections.
Right.
Is the chief of staff. John Kerry's still in the mix. I mean, they're putting the band back together, and they're going to kick butt on climate. So I'm really thrilled about that.
Yeah, I think the people ought to know that you were actually given an assignment a year or so ago as the chairman of the subcommittee on climate change, or
yeah, and this is how I got to work a little bit more closely with Ron Klain and some others, the president's chief of staff. I chaired the special committee on the climate crisis, and um, for Senate Democrats, and we put together a program. And the main thing was we didn't just want another bill, because there are lots of good bills out there, and we didn't just want some new way to talk about climate change. There are lots of like smart strategists who can, show you a poll and a PowerPoint, whatever. We wanted to do the hard work of coalition building that would allow us to actually succeed. So the first two conversations we had um, in the committee were with organized labor, to make sure that especially people in the trades felt like not just that they weren't going to be left behind, but that they were going to be beneficiaries, right? They were going to benefit from all of this climate transformation rather than get screwed by it. And then Native communities. We went through the Committee on Indian Affairs and reached out to tribal leaders and Native Hawaiian leaders and Alaska Native leaders and members to give us not just what they wanted in terms of climate action, but what they recommended to us, because as you know, there's plenty of wisdom in Native communities about how to manage better our natural resources. So we started there rather than with a bunch of, frankly, um, uh, uh, Caucasian wonky people in New York City or LA with a new spreadsheet showing how it's going to work. Barbara Mikulski, the former chair of appropriations, She used to say, "Nothing about me without me." And I think we really have to internalize that.
Well,
Whereas
she comes from Alaska, I guess, and she might have the same feelings about native input that you
oh
seem to
no,
share.
Mikulski's Maryland. She was
Oh,
the
Maryland. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yeah.
and then as our mutual good friend Chuck Friedman always says, paint a picture and paint me in it. We really need to describe to the broader public what is in it for them as it relates to climate action. Of course, everybody wants to keep the planet as healthy and safe as possible, but also just as a practical matter, a lot of people have more urgent
Well,
short-term
they need to
personal
live
needs.
right now, which
Yeah,
brings us to the I'm talking to some people, and they really don't understand the whole pipeline issue and why he would again do an executive order stopping. I don't know if this is throwing you a curve, Senator, but tell us a little bit about what that is about, the pipeline from Canada that goes across native lands, and how does
yeah. I
that
mean,
fit into all of this?
I think there's a native self-determination issue as these pipelines go right through tribal and other native lands. And I think the other problem is that the tar sands themselves are especially bad as fossil fuel because you really have to rip the crust of the earth off um, to access these tar sands. Now, the rationale from the tar sands developers is, look, we're either going to do this by truck or by pipeline, and pipeline is safer than truck and all the rest of it. It's not clear that that's true, that this thing would pencil out without the pipeline. And so it's not the only solution to climate action, but it is true that to the extent that you can cause some of these projects to be uneconomical and solar and wind and geothermal and battery storage continues to advance, then we're just going to leapfrog over this old technology and provide better jobs and a better economy for everybody.
Well, now you're chairman. I just saw this. You have become chairman of the Hawaiian Affairs, Indian Affairs Committee in the United States Senate. And tell us a little bit about what that's about and what your challenges are and what it might mean for Native Hawaiians in Hawaii.
Well, it's a thrill and an honor. Danny Akaka and Senator Inouye both held that position. There's a great bipartisan tradition. My vice chair is Lisa Murkowski, uh, and from Alaska, and the Hawaii-Alaska relationship remains strong. And we're going to try to move forward in solidarity, all Native people, Native Hawaiians, Alaska Natives, and what they call Indian country. I'm still getting used to using that phrase, but that is what they asked to be called. Um, and um, and I just want to work as hard as I can to maintain and enhance the trust relationship that the United States government has with Native Hawaiians. We've been making some good progress. I think we need to think in terms of resources to Native Hawaiians. Um, um, Capital N and not capital N, both on
Right. No, I got it.
and
Yeah.
and but in a period of COVID, I'm just thinking about resources for the Native Hawaiian Education Program, resources for Native Hawaiian Health, and resources for the Department of Hawaiian Homeland. So it's a
Yeah.
thrill to be in this
It's nice.
position.
It's nice. It's nice to talk about aspirational things, but when you're hungry, when you want somebody put some food on the table, and that may be where we are now. But you're also chairman. I saw talking about hungry of the Senate Subcommittee on Appropriations for Transportation and a number of other. What's
Yeah,
that like? And
well, I just started. I mean, brand new assignment. I'll be the chairman of the Transportation and HUD subcommittee. So that's transit, other transportation, and then housing and urban development.
talking
And
about hungry, you got a whole city over here that's hungry about
yeah, I'm
how we're
aware.
going to pay. If they're going to pay for the rail.
I
So,
would like to continue to benefit from low expectations, but this chairmanship is going to make it a little more challenging. Another thing I'll just note is that you get it's not something you get to pick, but your Republican counterpart really dictates how constructive your committee or subcommittee can be. and I have Lisa Murkowski and I have Susan Collins, and
wow, good.
and so I could do a heck of a lot worse. A good friend of mine is the chair of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and she was going to get Rand Paul as her counterpart. So, I got pretty good draws on this count.
And also finally, because I'm really excited with your appointment. You're also on the Foreign Relations Committee as well, and that's important to Hawaii and the East-West Center and the rest of it.
Yeah, this is new. I just got onto the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and it's an extraordinarily important committee. It's also just a very interesting perch. There are some members who focus on the Asia Pacific region, but none, I think, who have sort of made it their main focus. And so I'm very anxious to make sure that even though U.S. foreign policy leaders always give lip service to Asia, they inevitably get fixated on the Middle East and Europe because Europe's close. The Senate is frankly a European American institution, and so they just kind of want to go back to Europe and think about Europe, and travel to Europe, and then the Middle East is the Middle East. So I'm going to try to maintain that kind of dogged focus on the Asia Pacific region with an emphasis on the Pacific side of that, Federated States of Micronesia, all through Oceania. We need to be more of a constructive and positive presence. And I think climate adaptation and climate action is a way that we can be the America that we've always wanted to be. That where we lead by the example of our by the power of our example rather than the example of our power.
And also you got Korea and North Korea, and you got China, and you've got all these challenging situations, and how that is handled going to be probably one of the great challenges of this century. So, Senator, we appreciate the work you're doing, and I want to thank you very much for coming on the show at the last minute, really, and telling us a little bit of the experiences you went through. And most of all, we look for good things from you as usual. So thank you very much for joining us on ThinkTech Hawaii. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor. I look forward to seeing you in person when we can all be vaccinated.
Yeah, well, I got my 2 shots, so I'm a little bit more confident than I. Okay, thank you.